subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to part 2 of our 4-part series on building a judiciary for the 21st century with Vidhi Center for Legal Policy as our knowledge partner. This series draws from the findings of the Jaldi initiative at Vidhi. Just for our viewers, Jaldi stands for Justice, Access and Lowering Delays in India, and through this initiative there has been extensive empirical research over the last few years with over 30 reports. Today's session will focus on building an efficient judiciary with technology-led reforms, and for this I have a brilliant panel for all our viewers. We have Justice R.C. Chavan, former judge of the Bombay High Court, who's currently the Vice Chairperson of the E-Committee of the Supreme Court of India. We have Mr. Pramod Verma, CTO of Ekstep Foundation and Chief Architect of Aadhaar and India Stack. We have Advocate Anupama Hebar, partner at Keystone Partners, Advocates and Solicitors, and we have Ms. Deepika Kinhal, who's the team lead and senior resident fellow at the Jaldi initiative at Vidhi. Thank you so much for taking out the time and being here. Now, just to get straight at it, I would like to begin with Deepika, because since I mentioned the series is about building an efficient judiciary, and I believe for any such endeavor of such a huge scale, there needs to be a vision on what such a judiciary needs to look like and how do we get there. And as I believe Vidhi played a huge role in preparing the vision document for phase 3 of the eCourts project. So Deepika, if you could give us a brief for our viewers on what this vision document actually saw the potential for growth within the judiciary.
Thank you, Apurva. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this esteemed panel. So as you mentioned, Vidhi was part of the subcommittee that the E-Committee of the Supreme Court constituted. Vidhi was one of the experts on that committee, and we consulted a wide variety of experts, including Dr. Verma over here, who helped us with the technology aspects of it. Now, E-Courts Phase 3 came at a very interesting juncture. We had in the last 1.5 years seen the kind of effect pandemic has had on large systems, including the judiciaries across the world. With the Indian judiciary, it was able to remain functional and accessible to a large extent because of the developments that were made during phase 1 and phase 2 of the eCourts project. And eCourts project has been in place since 2005. With phase 3, we saw an immense opportunity because the system, when we were considering these changes, was already reaping benefits of the technology integration that had taken place so far. And to a large extent, the fact that during pandemic, Indian judiciary was functional because of this technology also helped naysayers to sort of cross the bridge and really identify the benefits of technology. So to that extent, we had this once in a lifetime opportunity, if you will, to transform the judiciary through technology. At the same time, the subcommittee was also mindful of the challenges, the ground realities that continues to exist in India even today, the likes of which are, technology divide, lack of access to internet in remote areas. These were the realities that the committees had to keep in mind while looking at how technology can play a deeper, greater role in the future of justice delivery systems. While balancing this, both sides of the equation, the challenges versus opportunity, what we realized was that the foundation could perhaps be laid down by Gandhiji's talisman. So the vision document starts with that. It starts with identifying the ultimate goal to benefit the weakest and the most marginalized sections of the society so that they can access justice more easily in a cost-effective manner. That is the base level which runs across all the components in the vision document. Now, how do we benefit this most marginalized and the least advantaged sections of the society? Here, what we propose in phase 3, which is distinct from phase 1 and phase 2, is that we adopt an ecosystem approach. By this, what we mean is that the judiciary creates the foundational technology infrastructure that is required for solutions to come from the ecosystem itself. Now, a direct and the most intuitive example that I can think of is what has happened with Google Maps. right? Google Maps is the infrastructure that a company called Google has created. But of that, you have services such as Uber, services such as Swiggy, everything else developing from there. What we envision in phase 3 is that the judiciary creates and owns that foundation digital infrastructure, and then the solutions will come from different users of the system to benefit the diverse categories of stakeholders. And those stakeholders include litigants, the judges, lawyers, reporters such as you who can benefit from the data that come from the judiciary, and researchers such as me who are interested in understanding how the judiciary is functioning, right? So we have thought of the unique benefits that all these diverse categories of stakeholders can derive from the future of the justice system. Now, this future, we believe, can be created through a 4-pronged strategy that we propose in the vision document. The first prong of the strategy is to simplify the processes. Now, as we know, the future belongs to a hybrid model of functioning where physical and virtual courts coexist. Hence, it is absolutely critical that we reimagine processes, simple processes such as delivery of summons to scheduling of cases. All of those need to be rethought to see how that can work as well in physical mode of functioning as they do in virtual mode of functioning. Simplification of processes is the first strategy that will lay the foundation for what technology can do. So the second prong is to build that technology layer. And here, as I said, we propose an ecosystem approach coupled with digital infrastructure that the judiciary will build. And this is so that different components of the justice delivery system, which comprises of courts, which comprises of police, other investigation agencies, prisons, legal aid cells, legal services authorities. So different components are connected such that there is interoperability between these different components, so that the stages in the life cycle of a dispute, starting from dispute avoidance, where disputes are avoided because there is more legal knowledge available in the society, to dispute containment, where disputes are resolved outside of court system through court annexed ADR centers, and then dispute resolution, which happens within the courts. So all these 3 stages are tackled, and benefits are given for all these 3 stages through the future where this digital platform is available. And the third prong of the strategy is to have an administrative framework. As we know, large-scale changes need a solid, dedicated team which will drive this change for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. As you said, vision needs to be driven by a dedicated plan, and the plan needs to comprise of this governance framework. A core component of the vision document, therefore, is this governance framework, coupled with what we see as the last mile, which is evaluation of all the changes that are proposed and that will be implemented in phase 3 in the coming years. So through this 4-pronged strategy, we envision that the future of the justice delivery systems will be transformative and something that will help India realize its constitutional promise of providing access to justice for all.
Of course, it does sound very commendable, but also a bit ambitious, if I may say so. And this is where I'd like to turn to Dr. Verma. Purely from a technological point of view, I'd like to understand, especially considering whatever happened in the past year, the digital divide widened, so to say. How feasible do you think is such a technological revolution, so to say, within the judiciary? And do you think there's an off chance that it might make the system more inaccessible?
Yeah, there is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Deepika wonderfully set it up, I think, the vision of the judiciary. Let me clarify a very common misconception of the technology. When you say technology is created a divide, you are thinking of smartphone and internet. But roads are technology, electricity is technology. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, they would look like a magic, many of that. That's how society embraces. Society embraces something that provides value to them way too fast. And we have seen that with phones. We have seen Indians embracing phones because it adds value to their everyday life. So the real question is not actually about whether technology will divide, technology will change. Technology is purely an enabler. How we leverage it, how we observe it, watch it carefully is very critical. So, for example, I want to talk about this is an example. I want to take it from Aadhaar. When we started Aadhaar in 2009, people were arguing, is it a number? You remember that conversation in Parliament, right? Is it a number? Is it a card? And for us as technologists, none of those conversations made even make sense because it's a number, it's digital in the system, but it's physical in manifestation to many people. And that's okay. That beauty of digital inside and phygital outside, not physical, not digital, phygital, allowing diverse population. People like us might prefer to carry Aadhaar on a smartphone. Somebody else might prefer to print it out, laminate it, cover it with 3 more polythene sheets, and cover it because they're in a, where they're in a slum area or where the documents are hard to preserve. It's their choice. So creating natively digital, but allowing physical access is an extremely important angle to that. And we recently saw that. I'm not even sure whether many of you understand this very well. UPI, when we did UPI payments, UPI is natively digital. That means the entire representation of payment inside the system, backbone is digital. But it is same thing that is available as a India Post man walking in front of a pensioner who is a 70-year-old lady putting a fingerprint and actually withdrawing money. That's accessible technology. So how do you create technology to access people? Doesn't mean internally you have to convert everything. So it's not whether digital or not digital. It is actually a digital inside, phygital outside is that story. And we saw that playing with COVID. Again, COVID, we just congratulate to all of us. We are doing vaccination like crazy, not enough. We continue to push for it. But we are the only country in the world who has actually issued a digitally verifiable WHO compliant vaccine credential to 1 billion people. But they don't have smartphones. They don't need smartphones. They can get a printed paper that can be laminated with a QR code. But the QR code is where the window is. That's the window of opportunity for them to say, I can prove that I have been vaccinated. I am not digital. But this is digital in a phygital form, right? The certificate, because inside the system, everything is digital. We are doing this consistently. And it is important that we understand that. And Deepika talked about that very well. Digital infrastructure on top of its solutioning can happen. It's very, very key. And that is what India Stack showed us, Aadhaar and UPI. We're natively digital, but doesn't mean service delivery has to be digital. It can be multi-channel. It has to be multi-channel, self-service or assisted. Many people require assistance. Multilingual, multi-modal. How do you provide the edge service delivery in multi-channel, multi-modal, multilingual, assisted self is the key. Doesn't mean that inside the system you have to be paper. It's like saying the bankers, normally that's what happened in the digitization world is in 80s and 90s as computers really came into picture, we digitized a manual system. That is like putting lipstick on the pig. Really what happened is the entire banking or entire system was so physical. KYC, paperwork, photocopies, scan paper, scan and attested and again scanned, makes no freaking sense, right? But you can actually keep doing this again and again and again. But they put a mobile app on top of it saying, oh, we have some digital. It should be flipped. Actually, inside the system, judiciary inside the system, the representation of a case, representation of identities, representation of schedules, linking of cases, all should be digital. But the service can be delivered in a very, very different way. I think if you can imagine that possibility, then we will end up serving a very aspirational young Indian who would just demand this has to be done. We cannot just live with 50, 100-year-old way of thinking because, young Indians are completely disconnected. and they need to be shown a better way to do it. But I think we can. I think the vision paper sets the tone beautifully, very, very forward-looking, but can be implemented without a digital divide. But again, I think hopefully we'll have a good civil society, very active civil society that keeps the last person observe the last person getting eliminated, discriminated, and voice it up. And media like you hopefully will bring it out, and the system will self-correct and move back, get better.
I think that was very good insight into how technology can be an enabler, though. Now, we've spoken about the technology side of things. This is where I'd like to go to Justice Chavan now. And, as the E-Committee of the Supreme Court did, especially over the last year, it sort of adapted to what was happening with COVID coming in. It brought in virtual hearings. I would like to talk here a little bit about live streaming, though. We had the Gujarat High Court take lead there and begin live streaming on YouTube, which was, I've read the comments. There are some really fascinating comments of common people. There are CA students who've never before had a chance to take a look at a court hearing except for in movies. And all of them are commenting about how it's very different and how this is a very good opportunity for them to actually see how courts work, and probably also let go of a bit of inhibition that people have with regard to the judiciary when they see what's actually happening inside the courts. But the Supreme Court has sort of taken at least around 3 years since the Swapnil Tripathi judgment to bring in those rules and guidelines. Do you think there was a little bit of hesitance within the system on opening up the courts to greater public scrutiny? Because that is what will end up happening with, the courts being sort of transmitted to people's computer screens and TV screens. Do you think that was the case?
No, I don't think that there is any hesitation within the system about going live. Just as in a physical court, no, there are some hearings which are out of bounds for everyone, okay?
Of course.
In camera hearings. Like that, we can shut off live streaming in areas where people did not know about what is happening, isn't it? This can be either, say, driven by or decided by enactments. POCSO, for example, they may not be live streamed. And then there may be some issues, some areas, some litigation where the parties or the judge may feel that this need not go in public domain. So that can be stopped. There's no problem about this. This can happen in a physical court also. No, we can take that we are going to meet the parties in chamber. So when we retire to chamber and call parties to the chamber, nobody knows that. No. So there is no hesitation as such. But the problem is this, that we have a 20,000 courts in the country. And to make these 20,000 courts go live, it's not a question of parliamentary session. You can and parliament session goes on for a few days in a year, few hours in a day. Now here, and there are 2 houses of parliament, that's all. Okay. Here we have got 20,000 courts and working from 11 to 5. So this is a problem which we are trying to tackle it. It will be solved. It will be resolved in course of time. See, the biggest advantage that we have is this. What happens with every technological jump that we want to take? Whether we have time on our side, that is the question. Okay. Fortunately, what happened is towards the end of 2019, Justice Chandrachud took over as chairperson of E-Committee. I took over in last year as vice chairman. One good thing is that we both work together in the Bombay High Court. So we need not talk to each other too much. We understand each other. So there's no time lost in communication as such. Okay. And then he is going to be around in the system till 2024. So this advantage of time, otherwise what happens is when a new captain takes over, again, everything has to be explained again, isn't it? Punascha Hari Om. So that is not going to be there. And now we are well set to take the plunge. So therefore, Swapnil Tripathi will be a reality and live streaming will be there. As you said, no, students will get a chance to see from their colleges itself as to what is happening in an important case. An important constitutional issue is being debated in the Supreme Court. Everybody could see it, no, how things are argued. Mm-hmm. This is what will educate the students. Apart from that, people have a right to know. And you cannot stop that right by saying that you can't travel, no, therefore you have to be, you can't hear what is happening in the court. Public hearing has another advantage, that judges realize that they are being seen by the world. So that is a chastising argument, isn't it? So tongues are not yet loose.
Actually, that's something that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, the absence of live streaming did sort of leave a void where live tweeting of court proceedings came in. What do you think about live tweeting? Do you think it did more harm than good, or do you think it actually brought courts closer to people in the absence of live streaming or recording of transcripts of court hearings?
So transcripts will be there. What is that? Transcripts will be there.
No, I mean, what do you think about live tweeting though?
Pardon?
Live tweeting of court hearings.
I did not follow you. Please.
I was mentioning that since there was no video conferencing or live streaming of court hearings, a lot of news channels and journalists began live tweeting of court hearings, putting out tweets on what was happening inside the court.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, what do you think about that?
Sometimes it was inaccurate reporting, because what the journalist at the back of the court heard, or what was conveyed to the journalist by the advocates, was reported. Now you can see live, no? So there is no problem as such.
So that's what I...
Journalists are not going to be redundant, okay?
Of course, no, that's not what I meant. But okay, so you mentioned that live streaming will become a reality. Do you have a timeline in your mind? By when do you think will it become a reality? And when will it reach the trial courts as well?
See, we have got these 3 years in which we will do as much as possible. As Deepika mentioned, there are so many issues like connectivity. You will be surprised that in Mumbai, there is a court at Dongri. Dongri is in heart of Bombay, okay? Those who know Mumbai. And the MTNA has informed us that that is technically not feasible site, TNF site. So they cannot connect Dongri court. This is the fun of our telecom services, okay? Anyway, we are trying to find alternatives. There are many areas where telecom services are poor, but we'll overcome that. There's no problem. Then, apart from telecom services, there is a training which will have to be given to the staff and judges also, because some things may have to be redacted. See, even in the parliamentary proceedings, it's not that everything goes live, no. Some things, there is a slip of tongue, so that has to be corrected. That need not go in public domain, no. So therefore, some 5 or 10 minutes of redacting, how it is to be done, how fast it is to be done. All this, we have actually framed live streaming rules, which you must have seen. We have sent the rules to the High Court. Yeah. So live streaming rules have been framed where all this is factored, but this will require a lot of training. We have to put trained technologists also in the courts, isn't it? And they have to interact with judicial officers, judges. So this will take some time, but I suppose 3 years window which we have, this, see, Justice Chandrachud's tenure is all that I hope for, because 3 years is a good time. In 3 years we can do that, isn't it?
So 3 years is what you're aiming for life.
Yes. Otherwise, what happens is every time we have somebody new coming up, some new ideas come, and then things get derailed. So this is the continuity is an important thing, isn't it?
For sure, of course. Now I'd like to come to
biggest strength is this opportunity, 3 years. Otherwise, other things we can overcome, no issues.
We certainly hope so. I'd like to come to Advocate Heba now. Now, we were talking about how the judiciary adapted to the COVID-19 lockdown, and we had virtual hearings take over. Now, as an advocate, I wanted to know your experience with virtual hearings, because it seemed like it had its pros and cons, but there are a lot of lawyers, especially in Delhi, who we are seeing now, who don't want to go back to physical hearings when they can attend 2-3 courts at a time, sitting in the comfort of their offices. So if you could share your experiences and why there is a resistance from lawyers to go back to physical hearings at all now.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a bit of both. There are a bunch of lawyers who I believe are very happy with virtual hearings because, like you said, you can attend more, you can get more done. You're not standing in court all day waiting for your matter to be called out. It's not, that the number of man hours that is wasted in court with 50 lawyers per courtroom, just standing waiting for their case to be called. I mean, it is shocking. Just if you were to do the math, it is truly shocking, right? I mean, that is time that can be better used. You can speed things up. But I think there is of course, there is resistance by some, maybe just endemic to human nature. You just do not, you don't feel the connect. There's no touch and feel. As Dr. Verma really rightly said, the service delivery being digital is not as satisfactory as being physical. Some just are unable to cope with the technological demands. I mean, a large part of non-commercial litigation still relies on traditional lawyers, people going to lawyers on the basis of trust, somebody they know. It's not large firms. I mean, we are exposed to large firms, but to be honest, I'm sure Deepika will know about this more than I do, but a large chunk of litigation is still run by local lawyers who clients are used to, your traditional legal setup. And for them, the technological divide is a challenge. I have seen it. Connectivity, these issues are there. Of course, there are larger issues that plague the country. But there are certainly a bunch of lawyers who resist this simply because it provides access to many. So take a classic example, right? I have a matter before the Karnataka High Court. It goes against me. I want to file an appeal before the Supreme Court. Now, my client may or may not be in a position to pay for me to fly there and do whatever is required. I will necessarily have to approach a lawyer in Delhi. Now, if you make it all digital and easily accessible, that guy whose source of revenue is just matters coming from across the country, all coming to appellate proceedings in Delhi, has lost that entire stream of work. So you will also see protectionist lawyers just kind of need to protect that source of revenue. They also do not want it. In fact, some in Karnataka were protesting outside court and saying we now have to sell Bhel Puri and what have you. So there was some very colorful protest that went on. So I think there is some resistance, certainly, but I do not think it would be wise to return to a full physical option. Of course, there are some hybrid options that are more acceptable than others. Maybe schedule VC hearings on a particular day, at a particular time. You can come up with modes of how you can achieve this hybrid mode. But certainly, I would think that a hybrid mode is the way forward, not entirely this or entirely that. I mean, at least in the near future, I would see that as a more acceptable format of court proceeding, because there are also times, I will not deny that in cases which are significantly bulky, which involve a lot of documents, a lot of propositions of law to be argued, the virtual mode is challenging. It does get exhausting for people to connect on Zoom calls for 6 hours, 7 hours. I'm sure all of you have had the Zoom fatigue. So I would personally think that hybrid is the way forward.
Okay, actually, you mentioned lawyers being protectionist about about the influx of technology in the judiciary. That's actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask, is whether advancing judicial administration reforms through technology. If you could elaborate a bit more on the hesitance within the system, say from lawyers or from judicial clerks or something, for instance, from, say, lawyers who might benefit from an opaque system of listing or from granting adjournments. If you could elaborate on that, not just from lawyers, I'm talking about all the stakeholders involved.
Right. So I think the opacity is really not. Yes, there'll certainly be stakeholders who benefit from delays and inefficiencies in the system. Certainly. I mean, it's a dispute. There'll be one person who wants to move it along. There'll be one person who does not want to move it along. So definitely there'll be participants who benefit. I do not think, obviously, they should be paid any heed. But in terms of other stakeholders, hesitating to adopt the system. I think something that we have noticed over the last 1.5 years, when COVID has pushed us out of our comfort zone and made us adopt technology at a much faster pace than we otherwise would have, is that a lot of this technological innovation seems to be lawyer facing. So I get an email a day from companies pushing technological solutions to my everyday problems as a lawyer, but I do not know how much of this is court facing. I'm sure with these, I mean, coming up with concept papers and vision documents, but how many in the private sector, how many are really working to push technological advancements to court? Like, I'll give you a very simple example, right? I send a document by email to court. What I do is I have paid for and trained my colleagues to bookmark documents. When it's a large file with multiple annexures, they're bookmarked, they're cross-referenced, they're very easy for me to use. I have one screen, I have another iPad, I flip between that, I have a pen on which I write notes on the side, I highlight it, I do all of these fancy things, right? But what possibly the judge is seeing is a scanned, unreadable PDF. The judge has no advantage of any of this technology. So to the judge, this is just much more difficult than it would be on paper. Because on paper, there's, and the same thing extends not just to the judge, but to the registry of court as well. So to them, it is just an added hoop they have to jump through. It is not actually solving any of their problems. And should they wish to go through this in the little time that they have, like the half an hour that they have when they're reading, then it's just easier to flip a paper book than do it on the screen. So I feel that any advancement has to go court facing first. That's where it needs to change, because frankly, I am delivering all of these technological solutions to my clients. Our practice is split midway. The way we interact with our clients is so different from the way we interact with the judiciary, because this is heavily driven by technology that is still like, we don't know, and then we're just finding our way. So I feel that the hesitancy that we see for adoption of this technology is not so much because they just don't want to move. It's because I feel the solutions provided to them are simply not as good as the solutions provided to me as a lawyer in the market. So I just feel that improvement there will make them adopt the technology far faster, and all of these inefficiencies you will not see. Of course, the ones who want to exploit the system will do so, but the ones who really want to move forward will do so if we provide them better technology. That's at least my personal experience.
See, Anupama ji
has been wanting to say something there.
Anupama ji, we will provide to our judicial officers and judges better than what you lawyers have.
Very good.
Our vision document, in fact, envisions this, that computer readable PDFs. And recently, another committee, Deepika was associated with that committee also, for developing SOPs for digitization. So we have developed an entire thing, and we are going to provide all that. One. Two, about your flipping of pages and paper books, you said heavy paper books. See, it is easy for a judge, at least young judges, forget, you cannot teach new tricks to old dog, it's okay. But from young judges, no, it's easy to go to a page on the computer screen rather than flip the pages. If there was a 3 or 4 volumes of paper book before the judge, the time taken by the lawyer also to go to that page, if he doesn't have a screen before him, okay, if he's not operating from his tab, and time taken by the court master to place the particular volume before the judge and then open the page. And then sometimes you have to compare 2 pages from 2 different places. How do you do it? It's the best way to do it is computers on the screen. That can be done. And let me assure you, this is dream, but this will be a reality. We will provide the best to our judicial officers, court staff also, taking notes, writing, everything, and also ensuring that these notes are wiped out when the matter goes to another judge. That also we will do.
Justice Chavan, that was actually going to be my next question to you, because of course you plan on and you're very ambitious about it. You will provide all this technology to the judges, but there have been a lot of chief justices in the past who've tried to do this, who've tried to bring technology to the judges. However, we've seen in Delhi there is certain hesitancy from the judges also, probably from the more senior judges, who do still prefer their papers over referring to the computers. How do you go about handling that? Or do you even think there is such a hesitancy around? Correct me if I'm wrong.
This is bound to be there. Basically, see, if I'm used to reading paper, I will read papers. Even though what we read, say, newspapers which come on electronic format, we are used to that newspaper 8 columns. So we see it in 8 columns here. This is useless, no? You did not see it in 8 columns. But this is the habit. This is the habit. So therefore, things will change slowly. Rome was not built in a day.
Of course.
I have been working on this court computerization for last 25 years, since the first district court was computerized way back in 1996 or 97. Okay, so since then I am working on this. Things are changing slowly. They will take time, but they will certainly. And as far as bad lawyers are concerned, who want to take advantage of delays and all that, true, there are bad lawyers, but bad lawyers, they are in minority. They are not in majority. Our youngsters will want more practice to come to them. Today, what is happening is, actually, we are shutting off half of work which should be coming to the courts because of these wrong practices, because courts are not accessible. If we use technology, more work will come. There will be greater speed. Disposal speed will be high. Judicial time will be more properly utilized. Anupama ji will agree. And I tell you, a senior advocate from Bangalore, I won't name him. He told me that, sir, I am spending more time in waiting in the lounges of the airport than actually arguing matters in the court, because I have to travel a lot going from one court. Now, from my office, if I can do it, there is no harm. About the 6 hours on computer screen, as Anupama ji mentioned. Anupama ji, what about 6 hours which you spend in waiting for your matter to be called out in the court and being told at the end of the day that no, it is adjourned? What happens? Secondly, and this is again with apologies to all in advance, so that there is no problem for print and me afterwards. Cricket matches are played. And bar rooms had TV sets in the bar rooms. And the lawyers would be busy watching a test match or a one day for the whole day. Okay. And taking the munshi or the clerk to go and tell the judge that the lawyer is busy before another court. Okay. Not attending the court. Now, if you can watch a test match or a 2020 on your screen for 4 or 5 hours, this is not taxing. Not too taxing, no. And this is within your control. So therefore, you can have the screen adjusted to suit you, isn't it? So therefore, all these things are transitory. These things will go in course of time. And the 3 years window that I have, we are going to make most of it.
You have a very positive approach towards it, of course.
So unless there is a bill, there is no way, no? You have to have the will.
Absolutely.
You have the will and we'll do it.
Absolutely. I'd like to come to Dr. Verma here. Now, Advocate Hebar spoke about the protectionist approach, and we also have a certain distrust in the society sometimes when it comes to technology. Now, it's not just about judiciary. Generally, we've seen whenever there is supposed to be an influx of technology into any industry, there is that distrust. How do you think we can manage that, especially when you talk about the judiciary now?
Mr. Verma, before Mr. Verma answers about the distrust you said, no? Mr. Verma, I have a very recent example of distrust. Okay, why I may not trust. On 21st October, when we were supposed to be achieving that 100 crores target or something like that, I was in a meeting in my office in the Supreme Court complex with members of my committee and Dr. Justice Pratibha Singh of Delhi High Court. Okay. The meeting lasted till 5:15, 5:30. Then I I went to another place, and by returning home, I just opened my mobile to see messages. Normally from unknown numbers, if there is a message, I delete it without reading. But that day there was some vaccination or something like that said. Therefore, I opened the message. And I was shocked to see that I had received first dose of vaccine that day. Okay. Then I reported it to a member who knows technology. He said, it's better that you download the certificate. You said QR code. No, Parmaji said QR code. So downgraded the certificate. And the certificate showed that at 2 minutes past 5, I had received first dose of my vaccine at Nagpur. The certificate mentions my 4 digits of my Aadhaar number also correctly. Now, how was this done? I have reported it to authorities. They check it. But I'm scared, what happens to my phone? The phone was very much in my pocket all the while.
Excellent, actually. Yeah.
So therefore, distrust is because of these things.
No, absolutely no. I think any new technology that gets introduced in the system, and we saw that with Aadhaar authentication, we saw that with telecom, simple SMS OTP or SMS spamming. You start distrusting real ones with good ones, bad ones. There are always bad people who would try to leverage the vulnerabilities of people. Most of the frauds that happen in the payment, it's not even inside the technology. It's actually outside. It's because it's easy to call someone to say, can you please share? I'm calling from the bank. I sound like a very trustable person. And a couple of calls later, you're sharing me your OTP and the money goes, right, in no time. So I think the society, as a society, and this is not something which you end up blaming. You don't say, I don't want to use, society has to go back to 80s because we don't want phones, because phones cheaters. Is the way we need to deal with it. Yeah, how do you, through a variety of societal campaigns, local community workshops, getting local language awareness campaigns going on. And it's a continuous habit change. There's a habit issue, and new people are thrusted into the technology way too fast sometimes. And they're not used to that, right? They don't know how to deal with ATM card. My father is an example of it. He would refuse to use one because he says, I am pretty much sure somebody will cheat me. I don't understand, so I'm going to pack it in, right? So he never used it. He prefers to go to bank. I mean, he wants to meet people. That's a different issue. But I think the real question is about technology gradually coming. But what does the system, as a system, how do we deal with this both from education, awareness point of view? Second, dispute resolution, for example, is there a well-defined exception handling and dispute resolution process? A lot of times we miss that. We look at what's called a happy flow. That means if you do this, everything happens well. And people forget to think about exceptions. People forget to think about dispute. When dispute comes, it piles up in the bank. They don't know how to deal with it. So, for example, NPCI, National Payment Corporation, recently launched a complete ODR mechanism to create a dispute resolution across the ecosystem, because 150 plus banks, wallet providers, phone pays and Google Pays, apps, merchants, it's a multi-party payment system. We can't say, oh, stop doing payment, let's go back to sort of dark ages. So the idea is to continuously watch for frauds and issues that emanating and be very active. The two parts of that is dispute resolution and exception handling processes. These two are almost always missed out. That's the last thing we end up doing while digitizing. So that's very key. I want to go back, if you give me a couple of minutes, I want to talk about a few other things that you would be interested in. And that's this. I think Deepika talked really well about an ecosystem play to bring solution. And Anupama beautifully complemented that actually point, saying we are doing tech outside. Inside is all physical, right? So even if she sends an annotated iPad annotated digital version, it gets translated into a photocopy, physical print, and then completely loses the sanctity or the meaning of that annotation. So by the time it gets to judges, it's a mess, right? Imagine other way around. If inside the judiciary was a digital representation of the case, it could have been printed out to judge who needs physical, who prefers physical. But you could have shown in a PDF or an iPad to a young judge who prefers digital. It's easy to go from digital to physical than physical to digital, okay? And we almost always end up saying, no. The inside the house is all messed up, it's all, physical. Outside we'll paint and nicely try to do some mobile app. That mobile app is not solving judiciary problem. It's like saying somehow mobile app will solve our education problem. It's not going to solve. We have physical schools, no boards, no teachers. We have a bigger problem that is going on, right? So I think fundamental inside re-engineering and reimagining. I think the vision paper talks about fundamental reimagination that's needed. Another point I want to talk about, I think that might be an input to the E-committee as well. UIDAI is a very good example. It's not well studied. We were doing 40,000 stations across the country, doing 1 to 1.5 million Aadhaar holders every day enrolling, and that's how we got to 1 billion people in 6.5 years, right? UIDAI bought 0 devices. Fundamental flaw in the system is we go back to procurement model. We are still in the 80s way of procuring digital or 90s way of digitizing banks. We are trying to procure cameras through an RFP process and write NSE to write a software. I am afraid 3 years not of what I am a perpetual optimist. Okay, the only reason I survive is because I am very optimistic. Otherwise, I've been ejected from the system. But I am still worried that 3 years won't be enough if you do an inward-looking procurement model of hardware procurement. 2 years or less than 1 year, UIDAI, iris devices, and fingerprint devices collapse the price by 1/5 to 1/10 because technology of sensors were advancing so fast. And as Mark Andreessen, the Netscape founder, said, software is eating the world. Everything is being softwareized. So you should not be procuring things thinking that this camera will last. You should be moving from CapEx to OpEx. If you cannot move from CapEx to OpEx, you will be perpetually in the procurement and will be asking some 50-member team to write some software. Not enough. And hence the idea of Deepika's original point about judiciary should look at 2 things. Move from CapEx to OpEx so that we can continuously replace the services. We don't care. The cameras are not working. We didn't even buy them. We don't need even to own those assets. Virtualize them. We don't own cars. We virtualize through Uber. We don't own houses. The young people don't do this anymore. Assets are overhead for us. And this is very important that you move from CapEx to OpEx. On the second layer, build only core digital building block. The case representation formats, identity of lawyers. We don't know identity. We just write names, random names of people, right? Solve that as what you call digital building blocks. Let ecosystem come up with certifiable solutions that can be literally replaced and ripped and replaced anytime you want and move on to OpEx world. Unless we do this, we will be perpetually on a build and operate model, which is completely failed in digitization. So that's one input request to the E-committee that if you can do that, I think you will be faster. Then 3 years, you might see some dramatic non-linear impact. And the last point I want to leave you with is the leveraging the ecosystem. Judiciary cannot remain untouchable. We don't know what's going on inside. The energy of the ecosystem, the young energy of the ecosystem is so high, you'll be surprised the amount of youngsters who would put up their hand and saying, so basically unbundle and create, sachetize the problem statement and leave it to the ecosystem to say, we are looking for solutions. Conduct hackathon, conduct this. You will be surprised the amount of energy and participation, including funds and support and donation and everything else. Today we don't. We say we don't need donation, right, from people. We can do it ourselves. But it's not about donation. It's about leveraging their energy. A small district court may be digitized faster because the local community believes they can be digitized faster than the Supreme Court. Give that opportunity to that ecosystem. but through a digital backbone, which is, I think, Deepika's point about digital core infrastructure must be owned by the judiciary, but allow ecosystem to thrive, solutioning and support to, on top of that, move from capex to opex. That's two.
That actually neatly ties up with what Deepika mentioned about the ecosystem approach. Deepika, you wanted to add something here.
Yes, I wanted to talk to the point on ecosystem approach that Dr. Verma rightfully emphasized on. And I would like to highlight the kind of different approach in terms of operationalizing that the E-committee is already taking. I think Justice Chavan was a little modest in admitting the kind of developments that they have made, which is putting Indian judiciary right on top of most modern judiciaries across the world. In the last 1.5 years alone, we have enabled virtual hearings, e-filing, e-payments even across different states. And the E-committee has been at the forefront of devising policies, frameworks to guide these developments, be it in the form of live streaming rules or now the SOP for digitization. And then most importantly, something that in our enthusiasm for technology, we tend to miss, especially concerning judiciary, is the privacy policy. So the judiciary is already thinking about the privacy concerns that may emerge once everything is digital, the kind of mishaps that may occur once live streaming actually becomes a reality, once all the sensitive and confidential underlying court documents become digital. It is unthinkable the kind of risks that may pose to the individuals. The judiciary is already thinking about it and has in fact put together a group to come up with a framework, a policy for privacy of individuals when it concerns judicial data. So the E-committee is already, I would say, miles ahead in thinking about how to actually make this a reality. And one key thing that has changed, and in this, I think I'm benefiting quite a bit by being this outsider insider with the judiciary, right? As a youngster, I'm getting to have an opportunity to contribute to this policy making because the judiciary has stopped being as conservative as it used to be. And conservatism is sort of inbuilt into the judiciary because of the kind of system it is. It needs to maintain its independence. It needs to stand as that pillar of democracy without any external interference. So that is necessary. It is a principle that it needs to cherish and uphold even in the future. However, it now sees merit in the kind of approach that Dr. Verma is espousing, which is that the energy in the ecosystem, the expertise of people outside the judiciary needs to be taken advantage of. And I think now the judiciary is opening itself up for that sort of engagement.
I think that's a very forward-looking note to end today's discussion on. I'd like to thank all our panelists for taking out the time and joining us today with such enthusiasm. Of course, I'd like to thank our viewers as well for taking out the time and watching this episode. Do stay tuned. We have 2 more videos in this series that will be made public in the next few days. So do watch out for those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful discussion. I think I learned so much through it.
Absolute pleasure. And yeah, Deepika is correct. Actually, the E-committee's vision is very, very ahead. But we don't need to look at we don't even need to imitate. A lot of times I tell my daughter, you better, your better version is what you need to be, not you become somebody else, right? I think so. We might be looking at like payments. We saw in many other places. We might be looking at a better version of our own judiciary. And I think E-committee is setting itself up. The vision document was brilliant for me too. My contribution was minimal, by the way, but it was brilliant to read about. And super excited for the possibilities of eventually access the judiciary. Right?
The next year is what will be, Justice Chavan, the next 3 years that I'll be looking at now.
Dr. Verma, this capex to opex, we'll take it up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Because a lot of times we get stuck in procurement models.
Yes.
Actually, a very, very good point about how everyone has moved. I mean, and only
virtualized.
Even actually imagined it like a capex to opex model. That was actually quite like for the judiciary, because even we get this so much. We also inherit
especially
this.
tech, right? Tech is just a tool. We should be able to replace it easily.
No, but I think that's what you brought a very good sense of technology into the whole debate, because I think the vision document also mentioned how the initiatives so far have come from the judiciary, but that's how you want to leverage the entire ecosystem approach, right? By involving all stakeholders.
No, the fact that some of us are even participating in the Supreme Court translation, for example, that AI-based translation tools was.
That's something that I wanted to talk about.
That is our foundation was helping building the open source, right? It was all completely open source. Now it's going into National Language Mission, which will get announced in the next couple of weeks, by the way.
Okay.
Massive language, 20 languages, all AI speech and translation coming through, completely open sourcing, built by India for India. And it's amazing coming. But judiciary was the first to adopt. It's amazing. Not even banking. Think about it. So I think there is so much of passion and drive inside. It is wonderful to see. It was alien to us, but when we started participating, because we are not lawyers, right? We don't want to be anywhere close to court. But when we realized, we said there's a lot of openness, a lot of intent, and wanting to do it. So brilliant. Yeah, looking forward.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.